The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Riverside Bistro, bouncing off polished glasses and the golden brown tables that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The place was calm, too calm. Yet, for Claire Hartman, the 27-year-old waitress with tired eyes and a polite smile, every second felt like walking on glass. She had worked there for almost 3 years, quietly blending into the background, known for her grace and warmth. But today, her trembling hands and darting eyes told a different story. Something wasn't right. At table 7 sat a man in his early 40s, sharp suit, expensive watch, confident posture. His name was Adrian Cole, CEO of a major tech company that had recently made headlines for a billion-dollar merger. To everyone around, he looked untouchable, wealthy, powerful, self-assured. But as he stirred the drink that had just been placed in front of him, Claire's breath caught in her throat. Because she knew what was in that glass. And she knew that if he drank it, this lunch might turn into something far darker. She glanced toward the kitchen, where a man in a black apron, Eddie, one of the line cooks, was pretending to clean a counter. But his eyes were fixed on Adrian's table. And when he noticed Claire looking, he gave her a small, almost taunting smile. That was the moment Claire realized she couldn't stay silent. She couldn't just walk away. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she took a napkin, pulled a pen from her apron, and quickly scribbled, "Don't drink it. Leave now. Please trust me." Then, with as much composure as she could muster, she slipped the napkin beneath Adrian's drink as she refilled his water. He looked up, confused but polite, as she gave him a tiny nod before walking away. Her heart pounded as she turned her back, pretending to take another order while watching him from the corner of her eye. When Adrian unfolded the napkin, his brow furrowed. For a second, he looked around, scanning faces. Then, in a calm but deliberate motion, he pushed the glass aside. Adrian stood up slowly and looked around the restaurant again. He caught Claire's gaze across the room. Their eyes locked for a brief, charged moment before he quietly walked toward the exit. She exhaled in relief until she saw Eddie slip out through the kitchen door right after him. Something told her it wasn't over. Outside, the afternoon sun glared off the pavement as Adrian headed toward his car. The riverside breeze carried the smell of baked bread from a nearby cafe and the faint sound of horns from passing boats. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. Cole," came a voice, low, sharp. Eddie. Adrian turned, cautious. "Yes?" Before Eddie could say another word, Claire burst out of the restaurant doors, running toward them. Her apron fluttered as she yelled, "Stop!" She reached them just as Eddie's hand slipped into his jacket. Adrian froze, instinctively stepping back, but Claire grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the curb. A second later, a metallic clatter hit the ground. A small vial shattered, the liquid sizzling faintly on the hot pavement. Adrian stared, stunned. "What the hell? What is this?" Claire's voice trembled. He was trying to drug your drink. I overheard him talking on the phone in the back. Something about you being a problem that needed to disappear quietly." Eddie cursed, his composure breaking. He took a step toward them, but just then a delivery driver coming up the alley saw the commotion and called out. Eddie panicked and bolted down the street. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the rush of the river and Claire's ragged breathing. Adrian looked at her with disbelief, then with something deeper, respect. "Gratitude? Why did you do that?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Because I couldn't let something happen and say nothing. I've seen too much of that already." That night, at the police station, the full story came out. Eddie had a record: small-time theft, fraud, and debts to people you don't cross. Investigators later found messages on his phone suggesting he'd been paid by a rival company to send a warning to Adrian. The attempt wasn't meant to kill him, just to incapacitate him, maybe stage a scandal. But the dose was far too high. If Adrian had drunk it, he might never have woken up. Over the following days, Adrian couldn't get Claire out of his mind. He learned she'd been working double shifts for months to pay off her mother's hospital bills. Her father had passed when she was 16, leaving her to raise her younger brother. Despite everything, she never complained, never asked for help. A week later, Adrian returned to the Riverside Bistro. Claire froze when she saw him. Part of her feared he'd think she'd done it for attention. But he smiled kindly, a mix of humility and warmth in his eyes that was missing the first time they met. "I owe you my life," he said quietly, pulling out a chair. "But something tells me that's not what you care about." She smiled faintly. "I just wanted you safe, that's all." He nodded. "Then maybe I can return the favor." At first, she resisted his offers. He tried to help pay for her mother's treatment, but she refused, proud and cautious. Yet Adrian admired that about her, the strength behind her gentleness. Eventually, he found another way. He offered her a position at his company not out of pity, but because he saw something rare in her, integrity. Months passed. Claire's life began to change. For the first time in years, she didn't have to count coins before paying rent. Her mother's health improved, and her brother started college. But what touched her most wasn't the money, it was Adrian's faith in her. They began working together closely. At first, it was purely professional, but soon conversations lingered longer. Late nights at the office turned into quiet talks about life, about regrets, about the people they used to be before pain reshaped them. Adrian had once been married, but his obsession with work had cost him his family. He confessed one evening, staring out at the city lights from the top floor of his building, that success had made him lonely. "You reminded me what really matters," he said softly. "I forgot what trust looks like until you walked up to my table that day." Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. "And you reminded me that kindness still exists even in places I never thought I'd find it." Their connection deepened, not rushed, but real. And just when things seemed calm, life tested them again. One morning, as Claire arrived at work, she found police cars outside the building. Someone had leaked sensitive documents from Adrian's company, information that could destroy his reputation and crash the merger. The investigation pointed to a staff computer logged in under Claire's name. She was stunned. "That's impossible." "I didn't, but the evidence looked damning." Adrian's board demanded action. The press began circling like vultures. And yet, through it all, Adrian didn't falter. He stood before his team, his voice steady. "Claire Hartman saved my life. I trust her with it again." The truth surfaced days later. Someone had hacked her credentials. Ironically, it was linked back to the same network that had hired Eddie months ago. The rival company hadn't stopped trying to ruin Adrian, and this time they tried to do it through the one person he trusted most. When her name was cleared, Claire broke down in tears, overwhelmed by relief and by how fiercely Adrian had defended her. He simply smiled and said, "You once told me to trust you." "I did. Now it's my turn." From that day forward, they became inseparable, not out of obligation, but because they'd both seen each other at their most human, their most broken, and still chosen to stand together.